Hey, so I wanted to do a little addendum to the last video because it was one thing I didn't get to talk about. And that was that I did some post-processing to some of the 3D printed parts in that project. And people on Twitter really seemed to like it, and I thought maybe it would be helpful to do a little video explaining how I did it and how it works. So, this is going to be a how-to video. So when I was working on the eyeball simulator, I found that I couldn't fit all of the electronics inside of the metal case. And I had to 3D print a little enclosure to go on the back of it to hold the stuff that wouldn't fit. And I don't really like how 3D printed parts look. I typically try to disguise them. If they have to be seen, I try to make them look like something else. And in this case, I wanted them to match the look of the enclosure. And so let me show you what I did here. So I experimented a little bit to try to get this to look like it was a metal box that had been painted, and then the paint chipped off a little bit, because there's some paint chips on this metal one here. And so I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but you can see there's these like metallic spots where it looks like the paint is chipped off. And I think it worked surprisingly well. I was not expecting it to look quite as good as it does. And yeah, so I don't know, maybe that'll be useful for other people. And I don't know if you're doing cosplay or model making or whatever, but it came out pretty good. So let me show you how that works. And to demonstrate, I printed this cube that I've designed that just looks like it has some mechanical features, right? It's got some like fake screw heads. It's got a little, I don't know, some little panel things. Got a grill. It's got a hole. So we're gonna apply all those techniques to this and see how it comes out in the end. So the first step is you're gonna wanna apply a primer. And that not only helps the paint stick to the plastic, but more importantly, it's going to help us smooth out those layer lines, because layer lines do not look like metal. Like if you can see layer lines, it's going to look like it's 3D printed. And then I wet sand it. By wet sanding it, you kind of take down the high spots, and so the primer stays in the grooves between the print lines, but then you sand it off the top. And then the second coat you put over it, it's flatter. And then so you let that dry, and then you sand that one again. And I don't know, you can do that as many times as you want. I did it, I think 3 times on this. And when it feels smooth and it looks smooth, then you can go on to start applying paint. And what I did here was I used a kind of spray paint that's like known as hammer tone or hammer finish spray paint. And it has a particular texture. It's sort of a bumpy, like ripply texture. You see it a lot on things like machine shop tools, like bench vices and bench grinders and drill presses. So first, I sprayed it with some black hammer tone, which is still looks metallic. It's just a very dark metallic. I let that dry. Once that was dry, I went over it with silver metallic. And it's really important with the hammer tone to apply really light coats, at least for this technique, because the heavier the coat, the more texture you get, and the texture really looks good in some applications. But I didn't want this to be too bumpy and too ripply. So if you apply lighter coats, then it tends to stay a little bit smoother. And then you let that dry, and let that dry for like a good long time. After the silver hammer tone is dry enough to touch so that it doesn't stick to your finger, like it doesn't have to be completely fully dry. Like you don't have to wait till the next day. Well, you should give it like an hour or two so that it's not tacky anymore. And then here comes the trick. And that's that, like all these places where you want the yellow paint or whatever paint you use as your top coat to chip off, just take some Vaseline, put a little bit on your finger, and you're just going to lightly dab it on like the corners and the edges and anywhere else that you think the paint would chip off. And part of this is, you have to think about the object if it was in use. If this object was actually being used, like where would it get banged up? They're going to happen on the corners, right? They're going to happen maybe where you plug something in and like maybe you plug the connector in the wrong place so it keeps chipping it. So you have to think a little bit like where would damage to the paint happen? And you're going to want to do, I don't know, 2 or 3, whatever you want, top coats until you cannot see any of the silver anymore. And then you have to let it dry. And like you really have to let this coat dry. All right, the paint on the cube has had all night to dry, and I think we can go ahead and finish this now. Pick at it with your fingernail too if you want. And then one last thing you can do just for fun is to give it a little bit of a black wash. And this is just acrylic black paint, watered down a little bit. And you can just kind of rub it into the crevices. And it sort of makes it look just a little bit dirty and grimy. You can also use black shoe polish for this. Okay, so there we have it. We have a cube, and it doesn't look like a 3D print anymore. It looks like a little metal cube with chipped paint. Yeah. So hopefully this technique is useful for you. If it is, and you try it out, let me know. You can let me know in the comments, or I don't know, find me on Twitter, send me some photos, whatever. Yeah, hope you enjoy. See you next time. Going to a heavy metal from the forest, and my head is better getting started. From the party, I think I saw you retired. I'm going to a heavy metal from the forest, and my head is better getting started. My mama said, this is so good, this is so, but she do not know.